So ladies, gentlemen, fellow Jokers out there, we finally got the official trailer for Joker Folie Deux. And I'm not going to waste any of your time because I've got enough to break down here. We got so many interesting things in this trailer that I just want to dive right into it. But before we do, if and only if you go on to enjoy this video, I'd really appreciate it if you hit that like button, and obviously consider subscribing to this channel for any more updates like this, stuff coming out of San Diego Comic-Con and whatnot. But let's dive into this because, man, that trailer was something. So the trailer picks up with a gorgeous shot of Gotham City as we see Arthur Fleck being transported from Arkham State Hospital to that of the Superior Court of Gotham to face trial for the crimes that he committed in Joker 1, or just Joker. Now, we hear a news reporter named Paddy Myers talk about how 2 years ago, the name Arthur Fleck hit Gotham like a hurricane, with other reports saying that it's going to be this trial of the century. Then we hear none other than District Attorney Harvey Dent, who isn't Two-Face, but he could go on to be Two-Face. More on that in a little bit. Believe it or not, I've got a good theory, if I do say so myself. Now, Harvey Dent says, and potentially in his opening statement, or it could be a comment to that of a news reporter, that they believe Arthur Fleck to be some kind of martyr. Well, he's not. He's a monster. And then we hear Arthur singing When You're Smiling by Louis Armstrong, with the lyrics being, when you're smiling, the whole world smiles with you. Yes, when you're laughing, yes, the sun comes shining through. The lyrics, I think, here basically pertain to just the whole round story to that of Arthur Fleck that we've seen so far, such as in the first movie when he said things like, my mother always told me to smile and put on a happy face. So when Arthur is smiling and singing this song, the whole world smiles with him, because despite that there are those who view him as a monster, of course, there's also many in Gotham who are smiling right alongside Arthur, as seen with the clown protester movement. Speaking of which, we see a bunch of his followers banging on Arthur's Gotham Correction escort, showing their love for him, with many signs in the background ranging from Free Joker to Dent is a clown, among many, many others. But this is where we get that familiar shot in Arkham State Hospital from the first trailer of Harley Quinn, who goes by the name of Lee in this film. But she is called Harley Quinn, we know that for a fact because she's got like a mugshot in Arkham saying so. But yeah, she goes by the name Lee, and she says, when I first saw Joker, when I saw you, for once in my life, I didn't feel so alone anymore. Now, this could just be a conversation that Lee has with Arthur early on in the film, letting him know how she came to know of him. But as we know, she does attend the trial at the Superior Court of Gotham in the shots that we've seen, and it does make me wonder if she'll speak during the trial as maybe, I don't know, a character witness. I'm not a lawyer, so I don't know, but this film's going to obviously play with many delusional scenes within the courtroom, so I wouldn't be surprised if anything goes outside of the legal realms. Now, this is where we see Lee looking at a store selling a bunch of radios, TVs, showing some footage of Arthur Fleck. Now, it seems that perhaps there's been an interview at Arkham State Hospital, since the footage displays Arthur with bars behind him. Now, perhaps he has allowed media to talk to him about the upcoming trial, because I think this is pretty much a given thing, because we know that Steve Coogan said that he has a very interesting scene with Joaquin Phoenix, saying that I play a CNN-type reporter who interviews him in his cell. And we can actually see another angle of that later on in the trailer. And in the first teaser trailer, we see that this CNN-type reporter asks him in this very interview, tell us, Arthur, what's changed? And then Arthur goes on to say, I'll tell you what's changed. And basically, I think this is a situation of possibly after the events of the first movie, Arthur was just like, okay, I'm not going to have a trial. I waive my rights to that. Just call me guilty or whatever. But since meeting Harley, or Lee, maybe he's willing to strike up a trial now, and he wants to go to court, and that's why there's now media attention giving him an interview, and why the reporter is saying what's changed. And then Arthur gives the answer of, well, the very thing that's changed is that he's not alone anymore, and maybe he feels like he has a reason to fight. But Lee changes everything for him. But it's also very important for me to stress when, I guess, talking about this entire trailer in general, but I guess, starting off with this scene here, is that obviously there's not a whole bunch of context to scenes like this, but not only that, to add the cherry on the cake here, as we know, the first Joker movie had a bunch of unreliable narration to it. You couldn't quite count on what you were seeing as real, such as when we saw Arthur dating Sophie Dumond, played by Zazie Beetz in the first film, and then the reality was that she was absolutely terrified of him sitting in her apartment, having really only ever seen him in passing as a neighbor. So you need to reflect that onto Joker 2, Folie à Deux here, because it's possible with scenes like this, with Harley looking at the interview, it could be an addition of unreliable narration in the movie, since after all, the movie is titled Joker Folie à Deux, which roughly translates to a shared madness, so you can obviously count on all kinds of unreliable perspectives and thus scenes as well that we're going to see in the movie. And I know there's like an even bigger question outside all of this as well, like, Harley appears to be a patient in Arkham, and yet here she is as like a free citizen wandering the streets of Gotham outside a store window, and she's watching the interview of Arthur, talking to that CNN type reporter, answering what's changed and that he's not alone anymore. So he's already met Harley at this point, yet she's not in Arkham, yet she's outside Arkham, wandering the streets of Gotham as a free person, such as those scenes we saw in the first teaser trailer. There's stuff like this which is very ambiguous. Do you know what I mean? Like, I've already addressed this so in depth in previous videos. Perhaps it's the case that, by the time Arthur ends up in Arkham at the end of the first film, maybe Harley was in there, but she was at the end of serving her time or whatever it was, and she was already on her way out. But the crossover of them meeting each other still allowed enough time for them to fall in love, but she then ends up getting out of Arkham, which would be very handy for Arthur, as I've said previously in other coverage of Joker, that, well, if he fell in love with Harley, who was on her way out of her time serving in Arkham State Hospital, and she's on the outside, well, now I've got a girlfriend who might be able to help get me out. Something like that. That's a rough theory, but anything could be happening here, but it's also important for me to mention that there are evidently scenes of Harley as a patient at Arkham, Lee, if you will, and her outside, wandering the streets, climbing the Joker stairs in her normal civilian attire, and it's a bit hard to know exactly what they're doing with that. Also, again, chuck in the unreliable narration on top of that. But this is when we see a bit of a montage of Arthur wandering throughout Arkham, one with Joaquin Phoenix's very scrawny physique here, doing that thing with his shoulder that we've heard Todd Phillips talk about, adding to the very skeletal figure of the Joker. We then see him in his suit, possibly getting ready to go to court or having returned from the trial, as it's likely that obviously this trial will go on for more than just one day. I mean, it's a big trial and they don't last one day, so he may have to return, to Arkham State Hospital after spending a day at the court. And then we see Harley's lighting a fire in Arkham, which actually matches up to that scene in the first trailer when she says to Arthur when they're watching a movie with other inmates, "Let's get out of here." And it seems that after that moment you saw from the teaser, she goes to the back of the room and sets that fire, and we see as the patients rush off here that Lee and Arthur stay alone in the room that is set ablaze, romantically enthralled in the chaos of the fire that is roaring, symbolizing, I guess you could say, and I'm looking a bit deep into it here, but cinematically symbolizing the very chaos of their relationship. And then we see scenes of alarms go off in Arkham, and all of the patients are rushing off to safety, and we see that Lee is holding Arthur's hand. But something I just want to interject with here is that I don't necessarily think that this is the moment when they actually escape. This is more of a messy situation that they cause at Arkham, for example, and I wouldn't be surprised if they, do attempt to escape, because we kind of see that here. But as for the actual escape in the movie, when we see Arthur running off into the streets of Gotham, so he's kind of broke out of the courtroom and he's being pursued by GCPD officers, we get clues as to exactly how that happens a little bit later on in this trailer and in the previous trailer, of which I'll get to in just a moment. But another thing that I want to add in here is that we do see towards the end of the trailer that this Arkham fire is what leads to the scenes of them both dancing outside, with both Lee and Arthur trying to jump up to the very front fence of Arkham State Hospital with a bunch of media gathering outside, just seeing them trying to climb it. And it's hard to tell, and this is the main point I wanted to talk about, it's actually hard to tell with trailers if this is actually a scene at the beginning of the film or at the very end, with them just attempting an escape, or actually after maybe even all of the court stuff is over. So with a bit of a theory here, if you indulge this for a second, with how this could be footage of the near ending, which just shows how both Lee and Arthur still end up at Arkham, at their home, if you will, or what they view as their madhouse home, and every now and again just having a bit of fun with trying to escape. That could be the ultimate destination for them, despite all the events in the film that we'll see. They could still end up at Arkham at the end, and every now and again it's like, hey, you want to get out of here? And it could just end like that, right? That's just another theory, despite seeing this fairly early on in the trailer, and the trailer posing it as if it's the first time they're trying to escape, when it could really be the last that we see in the film. And now that Arthur Fleck has found Lee, he starts singing For Once in My Life by Jean Duchon, originally written by Ron Miller and Orlando Murden, but we hear it sung by Frank Sinatra in the trailer. And the lyrics go, so for once in my life, I have someone who needs me, someone I've needed so long. For once, unafraid, I can go where life leads me. Somehow, I know I'll be strong. And once again here, to get a little bit deeper into it in terms of analysis, the lyrics could speak to how, Arthur, as we know, has always felt alone. One of the very focal parts and kindling that lit his fire in the first movie was that he was alone, he was always going unnoticed, he was disregarded by society, if you will. But now, for once in his life, he has someone who needs him. And through Harleen Quinzel, they are a perfect fit. And with where the story is at after Joker 1, I would say now the perfect recipe for disaster. This also, kind of in a low-key way, demonstrates how musical numbers will be injected into the film. This is obviously a less theatrical scene of singing that's, incorporated into a normal scene, if you will. Not so much of a glaring theatrical musical scene that we're definitely going to be getting plenty of those throughout the events of this movie, performed by Lee and Arthur through delusional shared madness fantasies, making them seem somewhat, I guess, larger than life and outside of reality, as we've seen those scenes from the teaser and now in this new trailer, such as the Joker and Harley show. I doubt they've managed to hire a camera crew and get graphics set up for that show. Do you know what I mean? Like, stuff like that is obviously a delusional shared fantasy, but I wouldn't doubt that there's also scenes like this when Arthur is singing in reality. Now up next we see Brendan Gleeson's character, who plays an Arkham State Hospital guard, asking, how about you, Arthur? Do you still think you're a star? And then we hear the court guard as Arthur is about to walk into the courtroom, and he says, showtime. And this is where we get the trial of Arthur Fleck, the trial of the century in the Superior Court of Gotham. And this will most certainly be the perfect stage, if you will, for Arthur and Lee to give their messy performance that will lead into a big explosion, literally, in the courtroom. But as you can see, when Arthur is in his suit and the courtroom door opens and everything just kind of gets cast into this blinding white, as if this whole spotlight gets put on him as he enters the courtroom, and that's when the court guard says showtime. This could be a perfect example of how we get a somewhat dreamscape sequence of a musical number, or a scene likened to that of when Arthur imagined himself on the Murray Franklin talk show when he was watching it with his mother in bed earlier on in the first movie. As we know, that was just a fantasy, him daydreaming of going on the show, despite him actually going on to appear as a guest at the end of the movie and where he kills Murray Franklin. I fully expect scenes to flow from reality as he walks into the courtroom, blinding white spotlight, and then he has another delusional sequence like that. That's how I think things like this will play out. And this is where the trailer really kicks off when we get this choir rendition of the When You're Smiling song with Sinatra singing, and we see more scenes of all of the protesters gathered outside the Superior Court of Gotham. We get dreamscape sequences of Arthur singing and dancing. We then get that shot that we saw in the first trailer of Lee visiting Arthur behind bars, saying that he can do anything he wants, breathing smoke into him, and call this a little bit of in-depth analysis again, if you will, but I always looked at this scene of them exchanging smoke between each other's mouths and lungs, speaking to almost this cinematically as a synergy between both characters, exchanging their life force, if you will. A romance, of course, but a being as one, a collective madness, a folie à deux, a shared madness, drifting in and out of one another as often these two characters do in the source material. Now, up next, we actually get to see a good angle of the courtroom scene as Arthur first walks in and he's about to take his seat, with lots of media there as he rallies his followers in acknowledgement. And we can actually see this very scene being played on the TV at Arkham State Hospital for the inmates to see. We can see that the Arkham guards, including Brendan Gleeson's character, is also watching it like, my God, this is something. And there's also a shot of Joker in his red suit, in the full Joker look, in his Gotham Correction transport vehicle. So he must turn up in full makeup to one of these days of his trial. In another separate scene after this, we see the GCPD head to the Arkham State Hospital. And it's important to note as well, by the way, how the locations are completely different from the Arkham State Hospital that Arthur went to in the first movie in order to get his mother's records. This, once again, shows, I think, a perfect example of the difference between Arthur's unreliable narration of the series of events that was seen in the first movie to that of what was, blatantly being told to the interviewer at the scene at the very end. It kind of makes you realize that everything we just heard was maybe Arthur reciting the story so far into that tape recorder to that interviewer that he ended up murdering. And the whole Arkham location on the interior was very white and clean and different from what we saw earlier. I know some people say maybe it's just a different floor, but again, I just think it speaks to how that was all just Arthur speaking to the therapist and recounting the events that we saw throughout the movie, hence all the unreliable scenes that we saw reflected differently in reality, such as Sophie Dumond. Now, as the trailer continues, we see him return back to Arkham in that red suit, cheering with the inmates, and we see that Arthur really isn't popular with the Arkham guards, like not at all, as he laughs in their face, likely returning back from court one day, as we do see him in that white collared shirt. But this is where things get very messed up for Arthur, and who knows how long he's endured this, but we actually see that he's getting heavily mistreated here by the Arkham guards, and possibly even waterboarded, as we even see Brendan Gleeson's character put a flannel over his face, and you can see the water sprinkle off in the background, not to mention that Arthur is soaked. So they're definitely, in my opinion, basically torturing him here. And again, what if he's been enduring this every other day, every single week he's been in Arkham so far? Then we see another familiar shot from the first trailer of Lee using blood, literally blood, to put a smile on her face, sat on one of the desks of what I believe is in the courtroom. As you can see, evidence files behind her, a box of evidence, one man possibly laid out on the desk, dead. So this could be a fantasy sequence rather than them actually managing to gain control of the courtroom, and I'll explain why in just a second. But then we see Arthur in his full Joker look, almost as if he's representing himself in court, which would be very interesting and very theatrical, saying, "Look around, look at all these people. I will no longer allow any of you to keep me down." And we even see that Gary is giving testimony in court in this moment. And you may remember him from the first Joker movie. He actually worked with Arthur as a clown alongside Randall. If you remember, Randall's the one who gave him the gun that he ended up using to kill the two Wayne employees on the train. And he actually, after murdering Randall in his apartment very viciously with his head bashing against the wall, he ended up letting Gary go because he was the only one who was ever nice to him. But it's obvious here that Gary has to be in court to give testimony as he witnessed Randall's murder. So Randall's death will obviously be another count of murder added to the trial of which Arthur will be facing. We then get that shot of Lee, or Harley Quinn at this point, in the elevator, the very elevator that goes to Arthur's apartment in Joker 1. And I have to admit, this makes me very concerned for Zazie Beetz' Sophie Dumond character. We know that Sophie Dumond, Zazie Beetz, is reprising her role in this film, and I don't know, random theory here, what if Lee's heard from Arthur about her and there's some jealousy and she goes there and just murders her? I know that's quite simplistic of a theory for me to put out there, but I don't know. You never know. She seems to have gone full Harley Quinn mode at this point, having cut her hair and done her makeup in that way we saw in the first teaser. So, yeah, let me know if you think Sophie Dumond is going to end up dead through the hands of Harley Quinn. And then we get to see the Joker and Harley show, and we hear Arthur say, I got this sneaking suspicion that we're not giving the people what they want. With Harley saying, it's okay, baby, let's give the people what they want. And this evidently is a dream sequence, as I mentioned earlier, of some kind, as even though Arthur escapes out into Gotham, I doubt, again, they'll be able to host something like this with everything already prepared. So this is probably just a shared madness fantasy. And speaking of an escape, ladies and gentlemen, this is where things get of a lot of substance in terms of what could be happening. And the escape that I teased earlier that we actually know about that leads to Arthur running out in the streets of Gotham in his court suit that we saw in that first teaser, well, that opportunity presents itself in the courtroom. So here we see a massive explosion go off in the courtroom, and this is what makes Arthur's suit go a little bit dusty and white colored. And we even get a scene immediately after the explosion that happens in the courtroom of Arthur wondering about the rubble, kind of really almost shell-shocked and wandering around deliriously. And then we see one of his Joker followers grab him, likely wanting to help secure his escape even more. And we know from some set photos and whatnot, he does get into a car being driven away, and obviously again he's kind of a bit out of it at this point, but then he does get out the car from the Joker followers who are helping him, and he kind of runs away from them, which I don't really blame him. He's probably a bit overwhelmed in this moment, probably has a head injury, which makes the whole distinction in the film between what is reality and what is delusion even more interesting. But after this moment, I have to admit, it is quite a big mystery as to what happens in the plot when Arthur is actually out of the courtroom, he's escaped, and out into Gotham City. And I also, of course, have a theory that all while this really isn't a Harvey Dent Two-Face movie, that the district attorney Harvey Dent prosecuting Arthur may very well get an injury from this explosion onto his face, perhaps even disfiguring half of it, as a nice nod to his origin in the comics. Or while it's a little bit different, it's something that they could easily do. Perhaps there's a news report saying, big explosion. Arthur Fleck's off in the wind in Gotham, but the DA's suffered, he's in critical condition with burns on his face. Something like that. And speaking of the courtroom, we see Arthur take the judge's gavel and strike the judge with it. Now, this does seem to be a fantasy scene to me, another example of one of those with the way that everything is lit. You can see the courtroom guard just stood still with the red light on them, almost like a play, right? In where the light dims and the focus only really goes on a couple of characters, and then the background actors remain still or they go backstage. I think scenes like this will just be Arthur fantasizing about what he wants to do. Now, speaking of delusional fantasy scenes, well, at the very end of the trailer, we get more of those teased, with Arthur performing with a whole band behind him. There's backing singers there. I can't wait to see or hear what that sounds like. Lee is performing, and then we see Arthur and Lee walking down a stage version of the courtroom steps, and that's blatantly the case because, it's a stage, there's like a black background, and I think this is just them having a shared madness, folie à deux delusion of the way they'd want to exit the courtroom building, perhaps after winning at trial, which wouldn't happen, but it's their version of, if we won, we want to exit in a scene like this, doing the Joker dance down the steps, but alas, it is just a fantasy for them. And then the very ending shot, we see Lee singing, "Sing Hallelujah, come on, get happy," with Arthur then getting involved on the next lines of the song, saying, "Get ready for Judgment Day." And oh boy, they're planning that Judgment Day, the day likely being the day of the courtroom explosion and whatever unfolds from there on out. Now, Arthur begins to walk away in this moment, not really showing too much on his face after singing the line about Judgment Day, but as he turns back, we get a great shot of him presenting a mischievous little smirk, and that, ladies and gentlemen, is Harley and Arthur knowing that they're about to get up to no good. So, ladies and gentlemen, fellow Jokers out there, that's everything I've got to say about this trailer. It's been a big rambly one, so I think I said a lot, so I would love to know your thoughts on this trailer. Let me know if you preferred this trailer over the first trailer. Let me know any theories you have. And other than that, I'm just going to leave the floor to you. Would really appreciate a like on this video. If you got this far, that means the world to me. Thank you so much for watching the entire video. Do consider subscribing for more videos like this on DC content. But I'm going to love you and leave you now. So again, thank you so much to those of you who are watching or have watched. I hope you have a lovely rest of your day, and I'll see you fellow Jokers out there in the next video. Goodbye.